Hey everyone, Pastor Nathan here. We're continuing our study of the in-between times during our Back to Basics, a Firm Foundation sermon series on Sunday mornings. And this last Sunday we talked about the temptation of Jesus. This next Sunday we're going to talk about his disciples' call, or the call of his first disciples. In Luke's gospel account, though, there's this really interesting scene that takes place in between those two. So Jesus has just experienced this incredible temptation scene after being, hearing God's what God thinks of him. His Father thinks of him, that he's my son, and I'm well pleased with you. And then temptation scene, and then he kind of launches into ministry. And one of the things that you read in Luke chapter 4, at least that I'm seeing in there, is that he starts off with this incredible sort of like success in ministry. He goes places, he teaches the word, he heals the sick, he drives out demons, and then people glorify God and glorify him. They're like, man, God's doing incredible work in the world. Then he gets back to a place where he is thoroughly and roundly rejected, even to the point where the townsfolk are on the verge of killing him. They take him to a cliffside, basically. They're like, we're gonna toss you off. We're that offended by what you're saying. If you were thinking that maybe this was some of the religious elite in Jerusalem, I wouldn't blame you, because those are primarily Jesus' enemies throughout the entirety of the Gospels. That it's the religious elite that really don't like him. But actually, in this account, it's not the religious elite who reject Jesus that soundly. It's actually the people who know him best. It's his friends, acquaintances, and maybe even extended family in the town of Nazareth. Jesus spent years growing up in the town of Nazareth, and so these were the people who kind of knew him best. And when Jesus declares who he is and what he's come to do, it's radically different than the picture they had of him in their mind. As a matter of fact, they even respond when Jesus quotes Isaiah and then says, this scripture has been fulfilled and you're hearing today. I'm the guy. I'm this person that we've been waiting for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. And the people say, wait, isn't this Joseph's son? How can he be saying something that radical? And Jesus actually then doubles down on this and accuses them of hardening their hearts and not having faith and not trusting him. And at which point then they drag him to the side of a cliff to try to kill him. It just was fascinating to me that this is the people who know him best are the ones who most quickly reject him. When you think the opposite would be true, that it would be the people who know him best that would be like, wait, yeah, this makes sense, and we totally want to follow you, Jesus. We trust you. But they had made some assumptions about Jesus, about who he is and what he was doing in the world, that Jesus just kind of blew up, and then they were left with being offended at him and by him, that he would claim to be something that they thought he could never be. Fast forward a couple thousand years to the 21st century, and I think we would not. this is still happening today. There are people who claim, and maybe this is you too. The people who claim to follow Jesus, and you and I, we follow him, and yet we may be the ones who most easily turn on Jesus when he doesn't act or lead where we would expect him to act, in the way we expect him to act, or acts in that way, or lead in the way we would expect him to lead, or where we expect him to lead. In fact, maybe there's been something that Jesus has or hasn't done in your life that has caused you to say, Jesus, I'm not sure I can trust you. Or even worse, Jesus, I don't trust you. I can't trust you. Get out of my life. Most often the way that this kind of works, at least as I've heard it, is when someone learns something new about Jesus Christ, or something, something that's revealed in Scripture to someone, that this is not about... This is about Jesus as he's revealed in Scripture, not necessarily something that doesn't line up with Scripture. But say, you've learned something, it lines up with Scripture, and then all of a sudden, maybe you think, or you've heard someone say, that's not how my Jesus would operate. That's not the Jesus I know. My Jesus would never condemn someone to hell. My Jesus would never want me to be hurt. My Jesus wants me to be happy. And you can kind of fill in the blank from there. The thing is, though, in the face of the caricature of Jesus Christ that sometimes we have in our minds, when confronted with the truth of Jesus and what he's doing, especially when it's different than what we might expect, and yet lines up perfectly with Scripture, with the witness of Scripture about him and what he's done in the world. As the text in Isaiah does, this is Luke 4:16 and following, where that Isaiah text lines up with what Jesus does, and yet people are like, we can't believe it. When that happens in our lives, when we learn something new about Jesus, we have the opportunity to grow in our faith, to experience a deeper and more profound faith and love for Jesus Christ. And we can respond differently than his friends and acquaintances in Nazareth. Of course, we could always respond like his friends and acquaintances in Nazareth, where we just say, well, I can't trust this Jesus anymore, I'm out. But what we're going to find, though, is that as the truth of Jesus Christ is revealed through Scripture in our lives, it's actually way better than the caricature of Jesus. That he is more profound, more loving, more deeply invested in us than we could ever kind of imagine on our own, which is awesome. So my question for you is this. Have you ever learned something new about Jesus, or perhaps even learned something new about Jesus recently? Have you been reminded of something that perhaps that you had forgotten? And how did you respond to that? With enthusiasm or with disdain? With greater faith, or by drawing away from Jesus and saying, I'm not sure I can follow you into that, Jesus? And my encouragement to you is this, is to examine those spaces and say, hey, you know what? I need to trust you more fully, Jesus, and not draw away, but draw near, because that's where peace, rest, life, and hope are found for this life and the life to come. Anyhow, hope that's helpful for you. We'll talk again soon. Take care.